This episode is about water and relationships. Let's start with the water part first. There's a physical and emotional response to natural thirst. The physical is clear. When most of us are thirsty, we head to our sinks, refrigerators, or cabinets and have our fill of filtered water, complete with a balance of fluoride and chlorine to keep us healthy. We don't think of this as a privilege, but an expectation. Most of us take clean drinking water for granted and only become conscious of clean water as a very valuable commodity when traveling to countries where some governments do not value this as their obligation to take care of everyone living within their borders. Lack of potable water can truly be a life and death issue. Everything from intestinal issues to cholera, dysentery, hepatitis A, and numerous other diseases exist without potable water. Here's the relationship part, and there are two parts to this. So here's the first. It's that exploitation of indigenous populations throughout much of our global history has occurred and continues to occur, often because corporations and some governments have a clear economic agenda. This exploitation under the guise of economic growth impacts part two of relationships, which is the determination of some truly remarkable folks to try to right this wrong by bringing together communities of need and support them in sustaining their existence. Reducing exploitation by increasing indigenous populations' capacity for sustainability through the collaborative process of bringing clean water to their region as a collective effort is key. One of the most threatened regions from deforestation and pollution is one of the largest rainforests in the world, the Manu Biosphere Reserve, which is an important model region for the sustainable management of natural resources and natural conservation. Manu Biosphere Reserve embraces an area of 18,000 square kilometers, larger than the state of Connecticut, of tropical habitats throughout the entire watershed of the Manu River. It is considered a global hotspot for biodiversity with 1,005 species of birds, 10% of the world's total avian biodiversity, 222 species of mammals, including 13 non-human primate species, and 287 species of reptiles and amphibians, and 1,300 species of butterflies. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, our podcast featuring nonprofits and social impact organizations under $10 million. My name is Dr. Laura Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. We hope you'll love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Please pass along any valuable information you hear today to others and send me the name of any organization you'd like featured at lwitkoff@gmail.com. That's 2 T's and 2 F's. Since 2003, Rainforest Flow has collaborated with Peruvian health and environmental agencies and indigenous communities to deliver more than 64 million gallons of safe drinking water to 4 villages in this global biodiversity hotspot. Rainforest Flow trains Indigenous Water and Sanitation Committee members to be leaders of their communities. Our guests are really incredibly amazing and special. From the life of an LA's fashion and advertising photographer to the depths of indigenous villages in Peru, founder and executive director Nancy Santullo has more than found her life's calling, and we are all very grateful to her. Nancy, together with a small team, including local experts as well as an anthrobotanist, medical anthropologist, and documentary filmmaker, Dr. Glenn Shepard, who, by the way, speaks 11 languages and has been involved in field work in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, have spearheaded this effort together and continue to be on the cutting edge of bringing water, sanitation, education, and relationship to the indigenous people who deserve to have their voices heard and their decisions respected. So let's get started. Welcome, Nancy and Glenn. Please, I have a few just introductory questions. Please share your passion, how this started for each of you, and how you two got together.
I know how we got together, relationship, right? It really was based out of relationship. I was searching, right? I was at a crossroads in my career as a photographer. There was a longing inside of me that knew that there was something more within me. I began to really just go on an inner journey. And I don't know, I think it started with hearing about someone that had gone to Brazil to drink ayahuasca. But what was really at the base, the core of what I was looking for is I wanted to connect with indigenous people that still lived connected to the land. I wanted to know, and the other internal longing was about what happens when we reach that point where we say, Uncle, no more. I can't go any further. This is not my fault. I can't go any further. I wanted to learn that, what was it to evolve victim consciousness? That was a real, I was in a study. I love the energy practice world. I was a commercial photographer, fashion and advertising for so many years. And it was really about documenting the physical beauty in people, but you couldn't document the physical beauty without that moment of their internal beauty, just
I love that.
blasting through their eyes, right? That was really the key. And again, in photography, it was about relationship, because the more comfortable someone felt with you, the deeper you could capture who they were. And so with all of that and bubbling up inside of me, I wanted to take a trip. And it was the interesting thing, because I was consulting with a wonderful Taoist master, a very well-known man in Los Angeles called Master Watching Me. And he had said, if you want my opinion, and he did my Chinese astrology, and he said, if you want my opinion, go south. I said, just go south. And, I was studying Qigong, and I heard of a woman that was going to Brazil to drink ayahuasca. And I said, I'm going to Peru. I don't think I even remember learning about Machu Picchu in high school, but we did. So I packed my bag and I showed up, and I spent 3 months in Peru. One day I was walking up the street, and I went into an office that was selling Rainforest tours. And I said, I'd like to go to the rainforest, but I don't want to go in as a tourist. And she ultimately, we've gone on to be best of soul sisters and friends.
It's beautiful.
And she was a biologist who went into ecotourism, and she presented me to Glenn. And she said, if you really want to if you're really serious about this, you have to know and connect with Glenn Shepherd. The first time I reached out to Glenn was 2001. And I wrote him this long email and sent him my letter of how I was going to go to the forest and bring water. It was initially water.
Education initially.
And then the school teacher said, what we really need is water. And so then I proceeded to water. And then when I connected with a colleague who worked with the UN, then I learned about WASH, and I understood that, water without sanitation and sanitation without water wouldn't work. And then without the health education portion of it, that was really the glue that held everything together. And so I made a conscious effort that was the programming that I wanted to develop. And I reached out to Glenn, and the first time, I love my Glenn story, because the first time he was like, just another gringo arriving to the rainforest that's going to save the Indians. And it was never that, because I never really looked at the indigenous people as poor. It was really within my consciousness that I wanted to go there and support people from their place of strength, and not from this victim.
That's what's so beautiful.
Right. And that was really the core. And that's what I feel the core of of the foundation is. And I think that's the light of it. And I think that's what people get drawn to. Because it's something greater than just bringing water. It's really documenting that journey to the tap, in which those lifetimes of encroachment and abuse begins to transform. And because someone actually kept their word to them.
The depth at which your professional background lent itself in some ways to see more deeply into the soul of another individual, I think in some ways allowed you to have an open mindset to not approach something in a more typically colonialistic, we're going to save you, we're going to do this for you, we're going to do this to you, but really we're going to do, you are part of this and I see you. The openness that you clearly had with each other to see the goodness of your approach is exactly what you're providing for not only Indigenous people, but for the rest of us to have a window into how this process can unfold in a respectful, beautiful way. That's what it sounds like to me.
It was a process. It is a process. It's ongoing. We
Right.
learn. And I remember in the beginning, and Glenn would comment on it, that one day we were bringing in materials we began the water project, and the road was horrible. We were stuck in mud, and they had to download all the materials on the side of the road. And I walked in from 2 hours walking in, and I got there, and I'm like, why, to the shaman and my team, and I raised my voice. It's like, you guys, the rain is gonna just ruin everything. Why would you leave those on the side of the road? And they just stopped and looked at me like I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then Glenn, I told Glenn about it, and he goes, Nan, with indigenous cultures, with the Machigenga, the only time you confront them is in a community meeting or when they're drunk. And so you really did that. Perfectionism in me that wanted everything done right. It was absolutely a process to learn. At the time, Michael Crichton was still here on the earth, and I had called Glenn because he was thinking about funding us, and I called Glenn and said, hey, I have some research dollars from Michael Crichton, can you come on? That was the click that brought us together. Would you say that, Glenn?
I mean, the version of the story that I heard, which is a little bit better, is that Nancy went to her Qigong master in LA, and he said, you need to go south. And she went, you mean like Baja? And he goes, no, further south.
I love it. You mean like a resort? No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. That's really funny.
When she first contacted me, at that point, I'd been working in Peru for about 15 years, working with the Machigenga people of Manu National Park.
What brought you to that, even those 15 years before we get into the meeting with Nancy?
That's a very long story. The very short version of it is my dad's a doctor, and so I went off to college hoping to become a doctor like my dad. But I did a pre-med course, but I discovered that I really liked languages. So I just took all the foreign languages I could. I already learned French, took German, took Arabic. I just took all these languages. And so my first field work was actually in Jordan with the Bedouin. I did field work on Jordanian Bedouin medicine in Jordan. I sort of discovered this field called ethnobotany, medical anthropology, so it's like, how can I combine medicine and languages? Like, how can I do this? And so I figured out, well, ethnobotany is like medicine in different cultures. So I went off to Jordan for a summer. I got funding from the university, spent a summer in Jordan. My TA in Arabic language was a British linguist who'd lived with these Bedouin in the middle of nowhere on the border with Iraq. And so he sent me with a letter, and I wound up in Jordan doing ethnobotany in Jordan. And then during that time, I was writing letters to a friend of mine in college. And he said, man, you wrote really cool letters from Jordan. I'm off to Peru to do my senior thesis work in Manu National Park. So I owe you. So he started, so he went, I get back from Jordan, and he heads off to Peru and starts writing me these amazing letters, like, we're going down the cloud forest, and there's howler monkeys, and in Manu National Park, and the Machigenga Indians. So I went to the library and looked up the Machigenga Indians and said, well, maybe I could learn Machigenga. And so I got a language book, and when they got back from that, it was like a semester, every fall semester, this professor at Princeton took students to Peru. And when they get back, I said, hey, I'm pretty good at languages. I'm interested in ethnobotany. I've done field work in Jordan. Would you take me to Peru? And Professor John Turborg, who's still alive, said, sure, get some money and I'll take you. So I went from like Jordan one summer to Peru the next summer, which was an incredible transition. But when I first set foot in that first village, I just felt like I was at home. It's like, this is it. I know this is it. So I just felt like, because I grew up in Virginia, hunting, fishing, crabbing, Chesapeake Bay, and somehow when stepped in this village and was like going out in the woods, hunting with these people and fishing, it felt like, what, this is like my childhood, this is great. And then 15 years later, at that point, in those 15 years, I learned the Machigenga language, started a doctoral program, finished my doctoral program, made a couple movies about Manu National Park, made a Discovery Channel film that won some Emmy Awards, made a film with National Geographic. And so I guess I became like the local expert on the Machigenga. Lots of people would get in touch with me, reality TV companies, and when that was a thing, gringos who wanted to show up. Oh, I want to do a health project. Oh, I want to bring milk to the children. I want to bring books to the children. All these do-gooders were coming to Manu, and they would see these poor Indians, quote unquote poor Indians, and these children, and they need help, and they need clothes, and they need this, and they need that. And they always really annoyed me because they would show up and they would spend a couple months in the village, and they would promise the world, oh, we're going to make a library, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then they would get sick and or have a nervous breakdown and then go off and disappear and never show up again. And at this point, this had happened multiple times, and I'd become much more wary about random gringos and gringas asking me to, I want to do a project with the Machiginga. And so I was very wary at the beginning. Like, who is this person? You know, do the Machiginga, do they even need water? I mean, this is the world's largest, source of, the Amazon is the world's largest source of fresh water. Do they actually need clean water? Maybe their water is just fine. Why do we always have to impose our views and change things? And it's kind of interesting because I got my first grant to go to Peru. Well, my second grant. I got a first grant as an undergraduate. I submitted a grant to this thing called the Henry Richardson Labuisse Grant. Henry Richardson Labuisse was the director of UNICEF for many years. And a lot of his career he spent putting water systems in, wells in Africa. And his wife, Henry Richardson Labuisse's wife, is Eva Curie Labuisse. She's the daughter of Pierre and Marie Curie, the people who discovered radium. I won this grant, and she interviewed me personally for this grant. And right before I left in 1987, I had dinner with her. And she said, my grant was about, how can we study ethnobotany, recover traditional medicine, and find a blend of modern medicine and traditional medicine that makes indigenous people more healthy. And she said, I loved your grant. It's a great idea about traditional medicine, but sometimes the best way to improve health is with water. That's the simplest way to health. And, my husband put in, hundreds of wells out throughout Africa, and we help people's well-being. And that was like 1986. She sent me that message, and I just sort of forgot about it. And then suddenly I find myself 15 years later, Nancy takes me to Wakadia village, this mixed Machiginga, Wachipaiti, two indigenous groups. And I said, do these people even need water? Let's go test the water. They had a government-installed tap water system. On one side of the river, the people had taps, government-installed taps. On the other side of the river, there was a group of houses that didn't have taps. They just used stream water. Here we are in the biggest, this pristine national park. And so I went and did the water testing, and oh boy, did they need clean water.
Glenn, on both sides, we're both.
Well, this was the irony. They were all contaminated, but the tap water was more contaminated than the natural water.
Interesting.
And when you tested the water system from the water capture point down to the systems through all the houses, it got more contaminated as it went through the village. It was a badly designed system, and the people would say, a deer jumped in the water system and in the tank and drowned, and we had like rotten deer parts coming through the system. So it was a really gross system. And so after being in the village for about 3 weeks, I realized, you know what, Nancy, these people definitely need an overhaul of this water system, because the children, there was, high incidence of diarrhea. 90% of the people had intestinal parasites. Lots of kids had anemia. And so my initial position as an anthropologist is, why change anything if they've lived in this environment for hundreds, thousands of years? I'm sure they know how to find clean water. And the fact is, in the past, they lived very dispersed in little settlements, just one household and then another household, another river. And so probably their water and their environment was less contaminated because they lived at a very low population density. But because of government schools and missionaries piled all these people, for us, a village of 150, 200 people doesn't sound like a lot. But in the past, they live in villages of 15, 20 people. And their culture, their lifeways hadn't adapted to living with 200 people all around a little schoolhouse. And suddenly their environment is full of parasites and the water's full of bacteria. There was no drains on the sinks. So the contaminated water that they were drinking and washing their hands with and cleaning food with would then just come out of the sink straight onto the surface of the school playground and of the houses. After I did this initial study, I was like, okay, I'm on board. Let's see if this will work.
How did you know Nancy was different from the other folks who'd come and said, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this?
Well, she didn't give up after the first 5 or 6 ignored emails. That was the first thing. She did not give up. First got in touch like in 2001, and I don't think I ever actually responded to an email till like 2003. So she was persistent. That's one thing about Nancy. She is persistent. And so that was step number 1. Yeah, step number 2 was she she showed herself capable of adapting. Her original project was about education, providing tutors for students to study in the nearby town, and basically that didn't work. It didn't work for lots of reasons. The students were malnourished, so they couldn't even focus on their primary education, and then they'd get to the secondary school level, and they couldn't compete with students who'd had a different training. And so she switched her focus. Her initial focus was on education, tutoring, schooling. She switched it to a more basic level, which was water. And so that already showed me she had the capacity to adapt and change.
Yeah, she had an open mind. So Carol Dweck has done this research on open and, a set mindset, and it's so true. When you have an open mindset, you really are curious and you're really looking for what the need is versus telling what the need is. And I admire you both for the adaptability and the recognition that water is often an answer to so many things. So I just love that.
So many, biological research projects and NGO work, they want the anthropologist to come and give like a stamp of approval. Come do a study, give us a stamp of approval. And the difference with Nancy was she actually wanted to hear my input. She did not want to do this project until she knew that it was that they were open to the idea of doing the project, and that their social system could adapt to it. And so and the other thing was the stuff that she made is beautiful. Usually when you see stuff made by the World Bank or the Peruvian government, it's these ugly structures that don't last 6 months, and they use the cheapest materials, and it's just ugly stuff that it breaks, and then it's this white elephant that just sits there and rots and looks ugly for the rest of time. And the sinks that she built are amazing. They're beautiful. It looks like it's made with these river rock. It looks like something you'd find in a Swiss chalet, like at a very chic, rustic sort of Swiss chalet. They're beautiful, beautiful work. And so these beautiful sinks, they look like some Incan art, these huge sinks, double sinks, beautiful stonework. And then when we go across the river, there was a little pipe going over a bridge across the river, and the indigenous people, the Machiginga family, they were in a hurry to get their water. So they quickly just jerry-rigged a little tap, and they just pulled a little tap up and had it going down, and they would use that to wash their feet when they'd get home. They'd use it to fill these big pots they make. She mentioned that the Machiginga people, they drink they do these every month or so. They have this big bout of masato, which is it's a low alcoholic fermented manioc beverage, and that's sort of like that's their party time. It's one of the most important social moments where everyone gets together. They sing, they dance, they vent all of their social frustrations. It's like a big cathartic sort of social venting that they do about once a month. And so they have these huge pot. They make masato by it's like 2% alcohol. It's very low alcohol. So you need to drink a lot to get drunk. And they make these huge, like they're these I don't know, 50-gallon aluminum pots, these gigantic pots. And so they would the people jerry-rigged this little tap where they could wash their feet, and they could, throw a little water like as a bath, and they could fill these huge masato pot, these huge manioc beer pots, which in a traditional sink you can't really fill them because the sink's this small. And they figured something out that's much more practical than a sink. And so from that point on, we took that idea, talked with our engineer, and then adapted it into this practical tap stand that rather than having a sink, instead it's this simple little circle of stonework and then a pillar in the middle with a tap stand, and it's much more practical for some of these villages that need to, like, someplace to fill their pots, someplace they can like wash off their feet and stuff like that. So that she showed this ability to adapt and to listen to the indigenous people in first place, and the anthropologists in the second place. It wasn't like a fixed idea. Most of these projects come in, go down the road, and the World Bank is going to put in toilets, not toilets, latrines. And you go down the road from Cusco to Manu, and there's 50. Every village there's a little blue plastic ugly latrine, and then you go back 6 months later and they're all broken or the doors ripped off and falling apart. And you go 3 years later and they do the same thing over and over. It's like the same model. They just repeat it and try to put it in as many villages as possible. Whereas Nancy's project really, as the project went on, she adapted the technology and the interventions to match the local needs. And so that adaptability really showed me that this is a really socially tuned model. It's attuned to the environmental situation, the environmental context, the technical context and to the cultural context.
For sure. And it sounds to me like Nancy and team are completely open to an iterative process. So if something looks like it may work better, you engage people to really test it out, will it, and then you actually employ it. And so it's a great model for all of us in anything we do, because most of us are so defended. You know, you had this idea, Nancy, you're going to do it this way, and you really did, like, you were so open and curious. And I think it allowed for, when we go back to the word relationship, it allowed for those relationships with these villagers to unfold. So Glenn was sort of a gate